All right, on to jury funding. So again, jury funding appropriated state dollars on the state fiscal year. So earlier this year, during legislative session, the legislature changed our jury process to a jury management funding process to a reimbursement model via Senate Bill 838. So that's great news. And it replaced our current advanced and reconciliation process. And again, it started July 1st of this year for this state fiscal year. This allowed us to eliminate a quarterly form. So 4 forms a year, we were able to condense the estimate form, the actuals form into one jury management reimbursement form. So that's great news. One less form, 100%. So for the budget side of jury for state fiscal year 21-22, the legislature appropriated us our $11.7 million of recurring funding. Did not get cut, which is great news. As well as in the back of the bill, they appropriated us $2.4 million of carry forward unexpended funds from the previous year. So funds that we were not able to utilize during the pandemic because of the slowdown, we were able to now bring those forward for this 1 year and add that to the $11.7 million that we have available for jury. And as a note, we are requesting this again for next year. So hopefully we get this language carried forward. And that way, anything that we don't spend this year, we will have available for next year as well. So that's great news. That brings our total jury budget for this year to $14.1 million. So that's $3.5 million that we have to spend quarterly. Again, we can't spend more than that, but that's a very generous amount per quarter this year. So just as a frame of reference, almost everyone has submitted their Q1 actuals, and it totaled just about 3.2. So under that 3.5, but which we'll get to later in our form, there was a lot of rollover dollars that we had, that you guys had. And so that brought that number down to 1.8 because we offset it with money that we had in individual clerks' offices. So again, there are 2 forms instead of 3 now related to jury. We have the signed certification letter, which is very similar to our pandemic recovery. And again, that is due at the beginning of each quarter and submitted to the reports email there in red. The certification letter for Q2 will be due January 10th. So this is our only forms that are due not on the 20th. And the thought process behind having them due on the 10th instead of the 20th is that gives us an extra week and a half to hopefully get this funding approved through the JAC and then through DFS, and hopefully get the funds to the counties a week and a half earlier. So that was the thought process behind it, moving up to the 10th. We got a lot of good feedback since this is our first go through. After Q1, state fiscal year Q1, that's when y'all were closing out your books. And so there was a lot of time crunch and a lot of things that needed to be changed. So, I think that's something we'll look at next year of maybe for the first quarter, not having it due on the 10th. But then for the rest of the time, we've heard feedback that that's very easily accomplished on the 10th. So we'll take care of that next year. The second form is the jury management reimbursement form. And again, it's filled out and submitted at the end of each quarter with the actuals that you spent, and it goes to the reports email there by the 10th of the following month. So the reimbursement form will be due the same time as the certification letter, January 10th. Huge thank you to Clerk Vic and her staff for helping us adapt the actuals form into this jury management reimbursement form and get that up and running in time for the first quarter. We would not have been able to accomplish that without her and her team. So huge thank you. And again, all the applicable forms, memos, information is available on our CCOC website at the link there in red. Any questions on jury before I pull up the form? Absolutely. Yep, estimate form and the actuals form, both those forms are gone, and now we just have the jury management reimbursement. So no more, you don't have to estimate anything. It is just strictly a reimbursement model. So I'll just pull up the certification form. So again, very similar to the pandemic recovery. You check the appropriate quarter, date it, clerk signs it, and then you send it in to our reports email. And then here is the new jury management reimbursement form, which again, very similar to the actuals, but we made some slight modifications to hopefully make it easier and more streamlined. So today we will be Alachua, since it's the first alphabetically. You just type in your contact's name, your email, reporting quarter. We'll retry. So we will do it for the first state quarter, July through September. And this is the first version that we're going to send in. So we select version 1. Now, if you'll notice, when we selected Alachua from the dropdown, over here in J5, it brings up the budget authority that they have allocated for Alachua for the year. Since this isn't really necessary moving forward, but it is a good guideline. It's based on 3 years of actuals. So it just kind of gives each county a guideline of what you've spent in the past and where you would like to be for this fiscal year. So before we start, since it is before the first quarter that you just completed, we will come down to a new addition to the form this year, which is F40. And this is where, when I mentioned we had like 1.6 million aggregate that we had on the books. So this is where, and I think I've talked to a lot of you on this, but any cash that we had on hand coming into this fiscal year, so what you had on hand June 30th, this is where it would go. And you would say, okay, let's say we had $5,000 left over from the previous year. And where this could come from is based on our previous model, where it was your estimate, and then actuals came back through later through a disbursement with JAC. There was a lot of, it was off slightly or sometimes by a lot. So some examples we saw for this 5,000, for example, let's say last state fiscal year when we were on the estimate actuals process, let's say you estimated to spend 100,000 for the year, but we only actually spent 95,000. So JAC dispersed us 100,000. We only spent 95,000. So we have 5,000 still on the books to carry forward. So that's likely where this number came from. Now, there are some counties that had funds going back all the way to fiscal year 16-17 when this appropriation was first appropriated to the clerks. But hopefully this was a one-time cleanup, cleanup to get us back to net zero coming into this fiscal year, into this new reimbursement process. So there were even some counties that had deficits here. So you were able to put a negative into this field. If for some reason you had $100,000 was dispersed and you spent $105,000, well, now we're owed $5,000 from the JAC, and this is where you'd put negative 5,000. And it does calculate over here in column K, but we'll get to that in a second. So coming back up to the top, so column G is for the state fiscal year quarter 1, and that's where all of our actual expenditures that we expended from July through September, we will put in here. So again, no more estimating, it's just truly what your jury expenses were. So in this scenario, let's say for personnel costs, for anyone that worked related to jury, let's say we had $30,000. Then for operational costs, still broken out in a couple different silos. So postage, we had $500. Printing, we had $500 as well. And then supplies, consistent, we had $500. And then let's say we had $500 of other. Now, if you'll notice next to the other, it says include specific description on row 48. So if we have anything in any of the three other categories, we scroll down to 48 where we can enter the description, and we stay in column G. And then we identify that it was operational where we had the other. And then it's for, let's say we had $500 of equipment maintenance costs. So that's where that goes. So we come back up and continue going down. So now we have the juror per diem. So again, this is broken out with a $15 for the first 3 days and then $30 for any day after that. And so it's the total amount. So let's say for the $15, we had 200 of those days, 3,000. Then for the 30 days, we had 100 of those. So it's also 3,000. And then we had $1,000 of other. So again, you would come down, since it is an other, you would come down here and specify in this column, row 48, what it was. Then for grand jury, same thing. We had $200 worth of the $15 a day. And the neat thing about this form is, so let's say we try to submit the next one as 3004. It gives us an error because that's not a multiple of 30. So that can't be our payment. So we correct it. We had $3,000 there again, $1,000 worth of other. And again, this is the last other line. We would come down to row 48 and identify what those charges were. And then we come to meals and lodging. So let's say we had $5,000 worth of meals, and an improvement from the previous form is it used to have to say breakfast, lunch, dinner, other, and now we've just rolled that up into meals. So we had $5,000 worth of meals, we had $1,000 worth of lodging, and that gets us to line 37, which is our total expenditures that we had for this quarter. So we had $52,000. Now, when we come down to the actual line on line 40, it take the $52,000, it took that and it included what we had, the $5,000 on hand from the previous fiscal year. That's the carry forward funding. So it says that we only need $47,000 dispersed from JAC. And again, the main line where we identify that is 42K. So that shows us when you submit this form, okay, we will need $47,000 of actuals dispersed from JAC. So this form would be complete, and this is what you would send in for quarter one. So quarter two should be a lot easier because we don't have to figure out what we have rolled over from the previous fiscal year. So let's fill out quarter two. So again, the form would be blank. You would fill in your contact information. We would identify October through December. And again, this is the first version of quarter two that we're sending in. Now all of our actual expenditures from October through December will be identified here in column H. But before we fill in any of our actuals, the one thing we will come back and do in column G is, let's say after you submitted this, we sent it to JAC, they dispersed us everything, 100% of what we requested. So that means that they dispersed us $47,000. So we'll come back in here for quarter one and identify that, yes, they did give us $47,000. We confirm that. And now it gives it to us to column K42. It calculates that as 0. So we are all caught up. So JAC does not owe us any funding as of quarter one. We're caught up, we're made whole, and now we can enter our actuals again. So is that pretty clear on the form? Does anyone have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
We need it recorded, sorry.
Where does the roll number break?
No, so it would be what you have on your books. But again, a likely place where going through it this past quarter, where a lot of it did come from, was counties that were caught up from 2 years ago, but coming into last state fiscal year, again, which was still on the estimate model. So, again, they said that, hey, we plan on spending $100,000 but we only ended up spending, for whatever reason, the pandemic, we only spent 80,000, but we were dispersed 100. So we have that $20,000 delta in our account. So that's what we have to carry forward. That's where most of it that we've, from talking to a lot of counties, that's where most of it's come from. But hopefully next year, since we are probably going to be reimbursed 100% of our actuals, everyone should be caught up going into next fiscal year. So, that will probably be zero. We may not even need that to include that if we're able to be 100% caught up going into that following fiscal year. All right, any other questions on jury? Mr. Dew.
Good morning, everybody. Jury been a real mess for several years. To the request, to member here. But JC was released 25%, and it wasn't enough. So, for the instance, yeah, the works. Good news is we have a lot. And we have less problems. Problems are picking up. How this all works. One of the questions I have to put you on the spot, but up on the right-hand column, we have an amount for your jury budget. Remember, over the years, when you got that jury budget amount, that was your approved budget, and if you expend it beyond that, we have enough money now. And that's my question to you. Let's say Union County gets whatever $30,000 and they spend $35,000. You have do they ever take out of the CCOC side?
That is a great question. So we would look at it rolled up. Everyone, so some counties would be above their quarterly, if you took that as an estimate, some counties would be above, some counties would be below, but we would look at everything total and then compare it to what we have released. So this year we have 3.5 million per quarter. So as long as it stays total 3.5 million or less, even if you're $100,000 over your, what your estimate, your past 3-year history is, as long as, 67 counties, we're under the total threshold, you would get reimbursed 100% of that. And this year, that likely will not be a problem because we have the 3.5% due to the great work of the legislative committee. And also with the rollover that we had, which was pretty substantial, that really drove down Q1 actuals. But to your question, in out years, if we get caught up and we don't have anything from previous years to roll over, we just have the 11.7 million and we spent over that in a quarter, we would likely just take the total that we spent down and prorate everyone down to that total.
And if you remember, the last couple of budget committee has brought it forward and adjusted everyone's budget authority for jury to match the actual dollars that they receive. So provided we have the funding available, that would probably most likely be the process of going forward. But to Kipren's point, should it be a year that we don't have the additional?
On the issue of having enough dollars, if we are extracting costs, we're looking at costs and effective through the legislative process. 11.7 wasn't enough a couple of years ago, so it's probably not going to be enough, year or two from now. We'll try to get different dollars. They're from the legislature, but we need that information. Also, if an individual clerk sends in their request for reimbursement, and you see in our office, is there a loss where they explain that or not? Would be calling them to say this seems to be a higher number than usual?
Great question. So at the bottom of the form, there is another below the other explanation. There's additional information. So if there's anything like that scenario, or anything big that you think, hey, the CCOC should know that this is what's going on, this is where you can put it by quarter. So great question.
Stating correctly. So what did it include? Quarterly budget? Would it be reimbursed in the quarterly budget?
So it depends on what quarter it happens in. So a lot of times if there's like this year, there will be extra carryover going into quarter 2 and likely quarters 3, quarters 4. And also as a note, the budget committee does look at if we know some of these cases are coming up, they're huge cases or a murder trial. They have pulled out some of these where, you know, we would track it on here, but we do know that, okay, there's something going on in Orange County. So, you know, we have looked at that ahead of time. But if it's a scenario where it's, you know, unexpected, we didn't know about it, it pops up in that fiscal year. You know, again, the same thoughts would apply where as long as we stay, you know, total under the, you know, at that point in the year under what is released, we're good. So, you know, I guess that's kind of the ebb and flow is some counties that's happening in this fiscal year, but other counties might be a little bit slower. So as long as it kind of evens out under the total.
Just to add to that a little bit, if you don't get the amount in one quarter, and so let's say we're at the 2.7 or 2.9 during a regular year. So if you submit a reimbursement and it has to be prorated down, let's say we got 3 instead of 2.9, there is likely not going to be you're likely not going to be able to get that in the next quarter. Okay, so that is where the amount that you're going to have to pull out, whatever you didn't get in reimbursed that quarter, you're going to have to set aside some of your CCOC dollars to pay for that, because the likelihood is that you're not going to get it in the next quarter item. So.
But the budget forms are not set up to where you have to spend a quarter of your money in the quarter, because it doesn't look. From a CCOC standpoint, you're just looking at 3.5. As long as we're in 3.5, you can spend whatever you want. Or
Right.
whatever your actuals are. They don't have to be exactly.
Right.
And you'll. Yeah, in theory,
Exactly. Any other questions on jury or pandemic? Any questions on the budget as a whole, CCOC budget, revenue? Budget's the most exciting part of your day. Of course. Sure. Hopefully. For this year. Okay, so no budget questions, no revenue questions, no jury. Pandemic recovery, December 31st. All right, we got it. Okay, sure. Thank you, everyone.